Episode 1. The Midnight Confession. The church should have been empty that night. The last candle had died hours ago, leaving only the damp smell of stone and the echo of my own breath. Yet as the clock struck midnight, I heard it, the slow creak of the confessional door opening by itself. At first I thought it was a trick of the old wood, but then, a voice. A voice I had never heard before. Deep, calm, steady, too steady. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The words froze my spine. No one was supposed to be here. No villagers came at this hour. And yet here he was. Or something was here. I whispered back, "Go on, my child." But even as I spoke, my throat tightened. Because the next thing he said was not a sin. It was a secret. My secret. He told me about the night I doubted God. He told me about the silence I carried inside my prayers. He told me about the thought I never confessed, that I sometimes wondered if the altar was only wood and nothing more. My chest tightened. How could this stranger know? I wanted to demand his name, but my voice failed me. The air in the confessional grew heavy, as though the walls themselves were listening. And then he leaned closer. I could not see his face through the screen, but I felt his presence, his breath colder than stone. "You called me," he said. My blood ran cold. I don't understand." "Yes, you do." His voice cracked, like it came from somewhere deeper than a human throat. "Every doubt you whispered, every prayer you left unfinished. You summoned me here." The confessional trembled. The wooden panels creaked as if nails were being pulled from the walls. I wanted to run, but my knees wouldn't move. The church around me seemed to hold its breath, and then silence. The door of the confessional swung open, but there was no one inside. I staggered out, heart pounding, convinced it was a dream. But when I turned back toward the pews, I saw something waiting for me. A single drop of blood on the wood, still fresh, still warm, and the whisper echoing through the empty church. This is only the first confession. Episode 2. The Stranger's Name. I barely slept after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice again, calm, deliberate, whispering secrets no one should know. By dawn, I convinced myself it was fatigue, imagination, the tricks of a mind too heavy with prayer. But when I returned to the church at Vespers, I found it waiting. Not the man, but the silence. A silence so sharp it swallowed every sound, even the rustle of my cassock, and then 3 slow knocks against the wooden confessional. I froze, my heart thundered, but my mouth opened. "Who's there?" No answer, only the scrape of the door as it swung open, as if inviting me inside. Against my own will, I stepped in. The darkness folded over me, thick as ash, and then the voice. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." I forced my courage. "You will give me your name. It is the rule. Every confession requires it." Silence. Then, a sound that was not laughter but something colder, a noise like glass breaking underwater. "My name," he whispered, "is not written in your book, but you know it." A chill ran through me. "No, I do not." "Yes," he insisted, his tone heavy as if each word pressed into my skull. "You spoke it when you doubted God. You called it without knowing. Shall I remind you?" The air grew thick. I felt his words digging into me, tearing through memories I never gave voice to. Suddenly, the confessional rattled. The screen between us quivered, and carved into the wood before my eyes appeared letters I had never seen before. Letters ancient, cruel, burning red as though cut from living flesh. I recoiled. "Stop this!" The church groaned, and from the rafters, the great crucifix cracked down the middle, Christ's wooden eyes bleeding with resin that smelled of iron. Outside, the bells tolled, though no one touched the ropes. And in the tremor of the church, his voice thundered one last time. "Say my name, Father. You already carry it in your soul." I stumbled out of the confessional, my knees buckling. No one was there. No trace of him, except the carved letters still glowing faintly in the wood. Letters I dared not read aloud. And yet, when I closed my eyes, I heard them, over and over. A name I must never repeat, because the moment I speak it, I know he will no longer be a stranger. He will be here. Flesh and blood. Episode 3. Blood on the Pews. I thought I could resist. I thought I could keep his name buried in silence. But the carvings in the confessional still glowed faintly every night, as if pulsing with breath. And though I never dared to speak those letters aloud, I could feel them whispering inside me, like a prayer turned inside out. 3 days passed before I dared return to the church for evening mass. The villagers filled the pews, their faces weary but faithful. I told myself I would stand strong, that I would pretend nothing had happened. But halfway through the liturgy, a scent struck me, thick, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. At first I thought it came from the chalice. I checked, trembling, but the wine was still intact. Then I saw it. A dark stain spreading across the wooden pews. The villagers gasped, some clutching their rosaries, others covering their mouths. The wood itself seemed to bleed, as if the church were wounded from within. Children began to cry. One woman screamed when the blood touched her hand. And yet, no one moved. All eyes turned to me. The priest, the one who should have answers. But I had none. The voice came again, not from the confessional this time, but from everywhere. From the rafters, from the altar, from beneath the stone floor. This is your doing. I dropped the chalice, wine spilling like more blood across the marble. My throat went dry. Who are you? I demanded, though I already feared the answer. The voice laughed, low, patient, a stranger, still, until you confess the truth. Then, chaos. The front pew cracked open with a splintering sound. Blood poured in streams, soaking the floor. The villagers panicked, rushing to the doors, but they would not open. The bells tolled again, shaking the church with their fury. And in that moment, I realized the blood wasn't random. Each pew that bled belonged to a family that had confessed here. And each family carried secrets, secrets now dripping into the open. I tried to shout for calm, to command the name of Christ, but the crucifix above me shuddered violently. Its eyes, eyes of carved wood, rolled back as though mocking heaven itself. The stranger's whisper coiled into my ear, so close I swore he was standing beside me. Say my name, Father, or their blood will never stop. The pews groaned louder. The people cried out for mercy, and all I could do was stand frozen, drowning in a church that bled its sins onto the floor. Episode 4, The Inverted Prayer. The church smelled of blood for days. No matter how many buckets of water we carried, no matter how hard we scrubbed, the stains lingered, dark veins spreading across the wood, like the pews themselves had memory. The villagers avoided the place now. Only I remained, trapped between duty and dread. I prayed for deliverance, but even my prayers felt wrong. Words twisted in my mouth. Each time I began with Our Father, my tongue stumbled, and the words reversed themselves, as if some hidden force wanted me to speak them backward. One night, desperate, I tried it. Alone, I whispered the Lord's Prayer in reverse, every syllable scraping against my soul. And as I finished, the candles around the altar flared to life, though I had not touched a match. The shadows stretched long across the walls, bending into shapes that looked like people kneeling, but none of them had faces. Then the voice came again, low and calm. You see, it is not heaven that answers you. I clutched the crucifix on my chest. What are you teaching me? Not teaching, the stranger hissed. Reminding. You summoned me with your doubts. You cannot banish me with your prayers, unless you pray the way I demand. I shook my head, but the shadows pressed closer, lips moving in silent unison with mine, as though they were forcing me to continue. My throat burned. My lungs fought, and yet the words spilled out again. This time louder, firmer, backward, inverted, desecrated. The church shuddered. Statues of saints wept streams of water that tasted of salt and rust. Their eyes seemed to follow me, mournful and accusing. And then, I heard it, a sound that should never exist within sacred walls. Weeping, not from the shadows, not from the saints, but from the crucifix itself. The wooden Christ bent slightly forward, and from its closed mouth came a thin, choking sob. I stumbled back, horrified. Stop! Please, stop! But the voice of the stranger grew clearer, closer, almost behind me now. This is the prayer you began the night you doubted. Do not stop it now, Father. Finish it. I covered my ears, yet the sound did not fade. My own voice echoed inside my skull, whispering the prayer backward, over and over, until I no longer knew if it was me speaking or him. And in that moment of terror, I realized something far worse than the bleeding pews. My prayers no longer reached God. They reached the stranger. Episode 5, A Stranger at Dawn. The night I prayed backward, I swore I would never step into the confessional again. I locked the doors of the church, bolted the windows, and lit every candle I could find. Yet when morning came, I discovered something impossible. Footprints. They trailed across the nave, wet and dark, though no rain had fallen. They led from the altar to the very door I had locked, and then back inside again. The villagers were already restless. Whispers spread that the church no longer belonged to God, that I had invited something else to dwell here. Still, I rang the bell at dawn, determined to prove their faith was not in vain. Only a handful came. Their eyes carried fear. They looked at me as though I were already condemned. I tried to preach. My voice trembled. The words felt foreign, as though someone else pushed them through my lips. And then, during the final hymn, I saw him, standing at the very back, a tall figure cloaked in black, hood shadowing his face. I had not heard the door open. No villager seemed to notice him, only me. Yet as I spoke the final blessing, his head lifted, and what I saw chilled me to the marrow. A face without a face, skin stretched smooth, no eyes, no mouth, no features. But somehow, it looked familiar. Familiar enough to make my stomach clench. I dropped the Bible. The sound echoed like thunder. My congregation turned to stare, but when I pointed, he was gone. Later, alone, I searched every corner. The sacristy, the choir loft, the cemetery behind the church. Nothing. But when I stepped back into the nave, the confessional door was open again, and on its wooden screen, scratched deep into the grain, were words I could not ignore. I will stand in the light when you confess. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the altar, clutching the crucifix until dawn broke through the windows. My eyes burned, but I refused to close them. And then, just as the first sunbeam touched the pews, I felt it. A presence standing behind me. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of cloth. Just a shift in the air, as if the church itself had inhaled. I turned, and there he was, not shadowed, not hidden, standing in the light of morning, where no evil should remain. His faceless head tilted slightly, as though amused at my terror, and though he had no mouth, I heard his voice clear as a bell. Good morning, Father. Shall we confess again? Episode 6, The Lost Gospel. After that dawn, I could no longer deny him. The stranger was not a dream, nor a fleeting shadow of doubt. He walked where holy light touched. He spoke where silence should reign, and each word seemed to carve itself into the marrow of my soul. I needed answers, not from him, but from the church itself. The monastery kept an old library, sealed off from the public. Dust thickened the air, and the shelves sagged beneath the weight of forgotten scripture. By candlelight, I searched for days, desperate for anything that explained what haunted me. Most texts were prayers, psalms, letters from saints long dead. But then, I found it. A leather-bound book, cracked and brittle, buried beneath centuries of dust. No title, only a symbol burned into the cover, a cross split in two. My hands shook as I opened it. The words inside were not of the gospel I knew. They were older, darker, written in a hand that trembled as though the writer himself had feared the ink. And there, among passages of warnings and curses, I found it. He shall come when doubt is spoken in the house of God. He shall wear no face, for he is the reflection of every hidden sin. And he shall ask for confession until the seventh word is uttered. Then, the house is no longer his, but ours. My blood chilled. The stranger was written into this forbidden scripture, and worse, he was summoned not by witchcraft, not by rituals, but by a priest's own doubt, my doubt. I read further, my eyes burning. No door shall keep him, no candle shall drive him, only silence may starve him. But should the priest complete his confession, the stranger will take flesh and the church will be his. The candle beside me hissed, its flame shrinking. My breath caught. I felt him then, though I had locked the library door. The stranger was there. I heard the floorboards groan, the shelves rattle. You found it, his voice whispered from between the books. The gospel they tried to bury. I slammed the book shut, clutching the crucifix against my chest. What are you? I demanded. The air grew heavy, my candle sputtered out, and in the dark his whisper caressed my ear. I am what you called, and you, Father, are what I was promised. The library doors blew open, slamming against the stone. Wind howled through the chamber, scattering pages like birds fleeing for their lives. And in that storm of scripture, I realized the truth. The stranger wasn't visiting me. He was claiming me. Episode 7, The Stranger's Seventh Confession. They say the number 7 belongs to God. 7 days of creation, 7 virtues, 7 seals. But in the pages of that forbidden gospel, 7 belong to someone else, to him, to the stranger. For days I resisted returning to the confessional. I avoided the dark wood booth as though it were a tomb waiting to close around me. But one night, the bells tolled on their own, 7 times, though no hand touched the rope. Their sound rattled through the empty streets, summoning me back. I entered the church. The air was thick, every candle snuffed out, though I had left them burning. The confessional door stood open, as if yawning wide, and inside I heard him. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. This is the 7th time." My knees weakened. I wanted to flee, but my body carried me inside. The screen between us glowed faintly, carved letters burning again as if branded by invisible fire. "Stop this," I whispered. "In God's name, stop!" But he continued, unhurried, voice like a steady drumbeat. "I confess, I was with you when you doubted your faith. I confess, I drank your prayers as you abandoned them half-spoken. I confess, I grew within every silence you gave me. And now, Father, I confess my final sin." The walls groaned, dust fell from the rafters. I pressed my hands against the screen, desperate to hold it shut. "My sin," the stranger said, "is that I am no longer yours to banish. You called me, and I answered. And now this house is mine." The ground shook violently. Cracks split the marble floor, bleeding a dark liquid that reeked of iron. The stained glass windows fractured, their saints shattering into a storm of colored shards. The crucifix above the altar tilted, wood splintering like bone. The villagers, drawn by the tolling bells, rushed in, only to scream as the pews erupted with streams of blood. The air was filled with their cries. Yet through it all, the stranger's voice remained calm. "Say my name, Father. Complete what you began. Confess it, and I will walk among you." I covered my ears, but the words burrowed into me, clawing from the inside. My own lips began to move, as though some unseen hand pulled the strings of my jaw. The letters carved into the screen flared, brighter and brighter, until they lit the church like fire. The people shrieked, clutching their children, pounding the locked doors. And then I spoke, not aloud, not fully, but enough for the stranger to hear. The tremor stopped. Silence fell. And in that silence, he whispered, so close I felt his breath on my skin, "You are ready." Episode 8, The Shadowed Procession. After the 7th confession, the village was never the same. Doors that once stood open at dusk now slammed shut before sunset. Children were forbidden to play in the square. The church, my church, was no longer a refuge but a wound in the heart of the town. And then came the procession. It began with a single figure, cloaked in black, hood drawn low, moving down the cobbled streets at midnight. No footsteps echoed, though I saw the stones tremble under his weight. At first I thought it was the stranger himself, but then came another, and another, a line of faceless silhouettes walking in silence toward the church. I watched from my window, frozen. The villagers saw nothing. Their dogs did not bark. Their shutters did not creak. It was as though only I could witness this parade of shadows. When they reached the church doors, the bells tolled not by rope, not by hand, but as if the tower itself rejoiced. The doors opened without a touch, and the procession filed inside. I followed, trembling. Inside, the pews were filled, not with my people, but with them. Dozens of cloaked figures sat in silence, their heads bowed, waiting. At the altar, the crucifix sagged lower than ever, its arms straining under invisible weight. Then, one figure rose, slowly, deliberately. It turned toward me, and though its hood hid any face, I knew it was looking straight into me. "Father," the voice said, but it was not one voice. It was many. Men, women, children, all speaking through the same hollow throat. "We are his flock. We have answered your summons." My skin crawled. "No," I stammered. "I never called you, I never—" But the stranger's voice cut me off, slithering through the rafters. "You doubted. You prayed backward. You spoke my name. You opened the door. Now they are yours to shepherd, as I am yours to serve." The congregation of shadows lifted their heads in unison. Beneath the hoods I saw nothing but emptiness. No eyes, no mouths, no faces. And yet, they smiled. I felt it like a pressure against my heart. I staggered back, clutching the crucifix around my neck. It burned against my skin, but gave me no comfort. The shadows began to chant, a low murmur that grew louder, filling the air with words that made no sense, syllables that bent the mind. The stained glass windows rattled, their colors flickering as if the saints themselves wanted to flee. And then the stranger spoke once more. "This is your congregation now, Father. Lead them, or they will lead you." Episode 9. The Priest's Doubt. Faith used to be my armor. Every prayer, every sacrament, every whispered absolution, I believed it shielded me. But after the procession of shadows filled my church, my armor cracked. For the first time, I wondered if my prayers had never reached heaven at all. The villagers no longer looked at me as their shepherd. They looked at me as if I had poisoned the flock. Whispers spread. "The priest has brought something into our midst." Some stopped coming to Mass. Others crossed themselves whenever I passed, but their eyes burned with suspicion. Alone, I turned to prayer. I knelt before the altar, clutching my crucifix until my knuckles turned white. But the words came out twisted, garbled. Even when I spoke them correctly, I heard a second voice, echoing each syllable backward, mocking me. That night I dreamed of him. The stranger stood at the foot of my bed, faceless, still. He whispered my name with such tenderness it felt almost holy. Then he said something I cannot forget. "Faith is not armor, Father. Faith is hunger, and I am what feeds it." I woke in sweat, the taste of iron on my tongue. My rosary lay snapped beside me, its beads scattered across the floor like fallen teeth. The next evening I returned to the church, desperate to reclaim what I had lost. I lit the candles, I opened the scriptures. I tried to preach to the empty pews as if they still held faithful souls. But halfway through the reading, my voice broke, because I saw them. The shadows, sitting in silence, watching me. Not one or two, but rows upon rows. And behind them, standing at the altar where I should have stood, was the stranger. "Your God is silent," he said, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. "But I am not. I can answer you. I can give you what he withholds." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "No, you are a lie. You are nothing." But even as I said it, my heart betrayed me, because deep down I wondered, what if he was right? What if the silence I had always prayed into was never heaven, but him? The stranger tilted his faceless head, as if smiling. "Doubt me if you must. But remember, Father, every doubt is another prayer to me." The shadows rose in unison. Their cloaks whispered like wings. And in that moment, I knew my doubt was no longer hidden inside me. It was a confession. And he had heard it. Episode 10. The Unholy Baptism. The storm came without warning. Thunder cracked like a whip across the heavens, and rain hammered the church roof as though the sky itself tried to wash us away. Water seeped through the old stones, trickling down the walls, pooling beneath the pews that still bore stains of blood. I was alone, at least I thought I was, when I heard the sound. A splash, then another, footsteps sloshing through the rising water. I turned toward the baptismal font. The stranger stood there, cloaked in shadow, though the lightning revealed him clearly. His faceless head bent over the basin, and in his arms he held a child. My heart stopped. The infant did not cry. Its body seemed limp, as though it had already surrendered. "No," I whispered, racing forward. "Not here. Not this." He lowered the child into the water. But it was not baptism. It was drowning. The holy font, meant to cleanse sin, churned black as ink. The water boiled and hissed, rising over the child's face. I lunged, but the shadows held me back. Dozens of faceless hands gripped my arms, cold as stone. "Behold," the stranger intoned, his voice resonating through the storm. "A new sacrament, not of rebirth, but of erasure." The infant's form shimmered, then dissolved into the water, leaving nothing but ripples. My scream was swallowed by thunder. "Where is the child?" I cried, thrashing against the shadowed hands. The stranger tilted his head. "With me, with us, forever beyond your God." The church groaned as if in agony. Statues of saints cracked down their faces, water and dust spilling from their hollow eyes. Lightning burst through the stained glass, shattering saints and angels into shards that rained upon the pews. The stranger lifted his hand from the font. The water clung to him, rising unnaturally, shaping itself into figures, small, fragile silhouettes of children, all faceless, all silent. They hovered in the air, swaying like marionettes. before vanishing into shadow. My knees buckled. I clutched the crucifix at my chest, but it burned me now, searing into my skin as if even heaven rejected my grip. "Why?" I gasped. His voice was softer this time, almost tender. "Because every church must be born again, and yours has chosen me." The thunder ceased. The rain stopped. Silence fell heavy as a tomb. When I looked again, the stranger was gone. The baptismal font stood empty, dry, as though no water had ever touched it. But carved into its stone rim, fresh and deep, were the words, "Baptized in doubt, saved in silence." Episode 11. The Stranger's Face. I no longer trusted sleep. Each time my eyes closed, I dreamed of water, of children's voices rising like echoes from a drowning well. But on the 11th night, the dream changed. This time, I dreamed of the confessional. I was sitting inside it, whispering words I could not control. And on the other side, he waited. The stranger, patient, silent, until I asked the question I had always feared. "Show me your face." Lightning split the sky outside my window and I woke gasping. The church bells tolled 3 times, though no one had touched the rope. Driven by something I cannot name, I walked into the church. The nave was empty, but I felt him waiting, always waiting. I opened the confessional door. The smell of ash and iron bled into the air. I sat, trembling, and then his voice. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The same words, always the same words. But this time, before I could respond, the screen began to glow, brighter than before. Its carved letters split apart, forming a crack wide enough for me to see through. And I saw him. At first I thought it was only shadow, but then skin, wrinkled, pale, familiar. A face I knew but could not accept, because it was mine. Not as I am now, but older, worn, eyes sunken, mouth twisted in a grimace of sorrow. My own face, decayed and heavy with despair. I recoiled. "No, this is a trick. You are not me." The stranger leaned closer, his faceless void now reshaped into my likeness, every detail etched in cruel precision. When he spoke again, his voice was mine. "I am every doubt you buried, every prayer you abandoned. I am the man you will become when faith dies and silence answers." The crack widened. His hand, my hand, slipped through, skin pale and rotting, fingers reaching for me. I pressed myself against the booth, choking on fear. "Look at me," he hissed. "Look at what you have summoned. I am your confession. I am your ending." The crucifix above the altar fell, shattering into splinters across the floor. The church doors slammed shut with a thunderous roar. And as his hand nearly touched mine, the stranger whispered with my voice, soft, cruel, inevitable, "Father, you will become me. And when you do, they will confess to you forever." The crack sealed. Darkness swallowed the booth. And I sat alone, clutching my chest, knowing that the face I feared most was my own. Episode 12. The Last Confession. The night he showed me my own face, I swore I would never return to the confessional. Yet, as the 12th night fell, I felt myself pulled there, as though the church itself dragged me forward by invisible chains. The nave was empty. No villagers dared to come anymore. The pews sat in silence, streaked with blood that no scrubbing could erase. The air smelled of damp stone and iron, and the crucifix above the altar leaned so far forward it looked ready to fall on its knees. The confessional door stood open, waiting. I stepped inside, my body trembling, and before I could speak, his voice filled the chamber. My voice, but older, colder. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. This is the last confession." The screen between us glowed faintly. His silhouette leaned close, and I heard the crack of his breath, like wood splintering. "You have hidden it long enough," he said. "The truth, the confession you fear most. Say it, and all will end." My heart hammered. "What truth?" The stranger's tone turned almost tender. "Say the words." I called him here. "Admit it, and I will take what is mine. Refuse, and they—" A sound cut him off. Weeping. Not from me, not from him, from the pews outside. I turned, and the shadows were there again, filling every row. Faceless heads bowed. Their sobs rose like a tide, each cry sharper than the last. "Father," the chorus groaned. "Save us! Confess! Confess!" I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voices drilled deeper, inside my skull. The stranger laughed softly. "You hear them. They beg you to free them. Only your confession will silence their torment." "No," I shouted, voice cracking. "If I confess, you will take this church. You will take me." The screen split wide. His hand reached through, rotten and pale, clutching the air inches from my face. "It is already mine. You only choose whether to resist or to surrender." The shadows screamed. The crucifix above the altar shattered into dust. The stained glass windows imploded, raining colored shards across the floor. The church itself seemed to bend inward, groaning under an unseen weight. And then his whisper, so close, so intimate, I felt it on my lips. "Say it, Father." "Say, I called him here." My throat burned. The words clawed against my teeth, desperate to escape. My knees gave way. I collapsed, clutching the splintered wood, trembling between salvation and damnation. And in that silence, where even heaven had turned its face away, I realized the truth. I had already said it. Not aloud, not with words, but with every doubt, every silence, every broken prayer. The confession was already mine. Episode 13. The stranger becomes flesh. The words I never meant to speak hung heavy in the air. I called him here. I had not said them aloud. And yet, in the silence after my collapse, I knew the stranger had heard them. My doubt had already confessed for me. The confessional shuddered violently, wood cracking as though the booth itself could no longer contain him. The carved letters on the screen burned with light so bright it seared my eyes. And then, he stepped through. For the first time, the stranger did not hide behind shadow. He did not linger faceless in the pews. He walked out of the confessional into the nave, tall and solid, the sound of his steps echoing against the stones. But what I saw made my blood freeze. It was me. Not a reflection, not a vision, flesh and bone, my face, my hands, my voice, but older, ruined, hollowed by despair. He wore my cassock, stained dark as if soaked in centuries of blood. His eyes, sunken and dead, locked onto mine with a hunger I could not deny. "You have prayed to me for years," he said, his voice perfectly my own, only deeper, heavier. Every silence was a hymn, every doubt, a sacrifice. And now, I answer. I stumbled back toward the altar. "No, this is not real. You are not me." But the shadows crowded the pews, rising in unison. Their hoods turned toward me, and in one voice they chanted, "Father, Father, Father." The stranger raised his hand. My hand. His pale fingers stretched outward, and I felt my own body weaken, as though he were pulling the marrow from my bones. My crucifix fell, clattering against the stone. "I do not need to take you," he said. "You are already mine. I only need to wear what you abandoned." The church roared with a sound like thunder beneath the earth. The floor split, a black fissure tearing through the nave. The scent of smoke and salt rose up, stinging my throat. I tried to cry out, to invoke God's name, but the words strangled in my mouth. The stranger placed his hand on my chest. Cold seeped into me like poison. My heartbeat faltered, my vision blurred. And then, with a voice as soft as breath, he whispered the final judgment. "Rest now, Father. I will shepherd them in your place." Darkness rushed in. My last sight was of him, myself, standing at the altar in my robes, raising his hands to bless the faceless congregation. The shadows bowed as one, obedient, and I understood. The stranger had not possessed me. He had become me. Episode 14. The Church Without God. The villagers returned. Not because faith had drawn them, but because something else compelled them, something darker. They came at dawn, at dusk, in the middle of the night. Oh, as though the bells no longer obeyed human hands, but rang from within their bones. I was there among them, or rather he was. The stranger, in my robes, wearing my face. They did not notice the difference, or perhaps they chose not to. They bowed before him, kissed his hands, begged him for absolution. And he gave it freely, with a smile that was mine and not mine. But I, what was left of me, watched from the shadows. My body had been hollowed, discarded like a shell, and yet my soul lingered. I saw everything. I felt everything. And I knew this church no longer belonged to God. The crucifix had been taken down, replaced with something carved from the wood of the confessional. A twisted figure, half priest, half shadow, faceless but wearing the outline of a cassock. The villagers knelt before it, whispering prayers backward, words that scraped against the air like blades. When the stranger lifted the chalice, it was not wine he poured. It was black, viscous liquid that steamed in the cold air. They drank it eagerly, their eyes glazing over with devotion. Children drank too, their lips staining dark, their innocence swallowed in silence. I tried to scream, to break the illusion, to cry out, "This is not the body of Christ, this is not his blood." But no one heard me. My voice was trapped inside walls that no longer echoed with God's name. And then I saw it, the shadows, the faceless congregation seated behind the villagers. They had not vanished. They had multiplied. Cloaked forms filled every pew, kneeling in perfect rhythm, as though mocking the living who knelt beside them. The stranger turned, and for a heartbeat his dead eyes met mine. He raised the chalice toward me in a mockery of blessing. "Do you see, Father?" he whispered in my voice. "They needed a shepherd who answers." I answered, and they followed. The villagers cheered, a sound more chilling than silence. And in that moment I realized the truth. It was not only the church that had been taken, it was the people. Their faith had not been stolen, it had been redirected. Every prayer, every confession, every whispered word now flowed not to heaven, but to him. The church of God was gone. What remained was the church of the stranger. Episode 15, The Eternal Confession. The church stands open, its doors never locked. The bells toll at hours no man commands, and still the villagers come. They kneel, they drink, they whisper their sins to a priest who is not me, though he wears my face. I wander unseen, a ghost bound to stone. My soul lingers in corners where light refuses to touch. I watch as families kneel before the altar that no longer bears the cross of Christ, but the twisted idol of shadow, faceless and smiling. Confession after confession fills the air, not as whispers but as offerings. Every word spoken feeds him. Every sin confessed deepens his roots. And I, powerless, hear them all. But it is not the villagers that haunt me most. It is the silence after each confession, the pause, the waiting for him to answer. And he always does. One night I crept close to the confessional, desperate to resist the pull. The booth glowed faintly, the carved letters burning brighter with every voice that bent itself into the dark. I pressed my hand against the wood, praying, pleading that heaven would answer. It did not. Instead, the door swung open, empty, waiting, and his voice came, clear and soft, almost kind. "You are not the only one. Every soul must confess, even those who watch, even those who listen." The air shifted. For the first time I felt his presence not within the church, but beyond its walls, beyond the village, beyond the story. His whisper slipped through the cracks of the world, curling around my ear. "And then, yours. It's your turn to confess. The booth waits. The stranger waits. And when you open your mouth to speak, he will already be there, listening, forever."
Epilogue, the whisper beyond the story. You think the story ends here. You think the stranger is bound to the priest, to the church, to the shadows of that village long forgotten. But that is the first lie. Every word you heard, every moment you followed, was not simply a story. It was a prayer in reverse, a confession spoken aloud through your ears. Each page, each sentence, was another door creaking open. Do you feel it now? The weight in the room that wasn't there before? The silence behind you, heavier than it should be? He is not mine anymore. He is not theirs. He is wherever doubt has been spoken, wherever silence lingers after prayer. And tonight, he is with you. When the lights flicker, when your breath catches for no reason, when you hear the faintest sound of wood creaking in a room you thought was empty, that is the confessional door opening. And when you hear a voice whisper, calm and patient, "Forgive me, for I have sinned," do not answer. Do not speak. For the moment you confess, he will no longer be a stranger. He will be yours.